Hi, this is Prasant, and I'm glad to share this video with you today about a couple simple gamakams that stem from the vibrato technique on the saxophone. In fact, the vibrato, the way it's used in Western music, is a little different from how it's used in Carnatic music. In fact, what we do is we take the essence of the technique and we apply it very differently. And there are a few different places we actually use the technique of vibrato in Carnatic music. Primarily, one is to create unique, small, and subtle oscillations. So actually changing the pitch a little bit. That's by staying on the same note and bending the pitch slightly, using the vibrato a little farther than you would do for a vibrato. And the second is to create a softer and more pleasing articulation when you're improvising swara kalpana. That's the more rhythmic passages of improvisation that we do during the concert in the middle of a song. So I'm going to show you how to do both of those today, and it should be pretty easy. So let's start with the basic technique you're going to need. And I like to call these vibrato pulses, because what you're actually doing is, instead of tonguing a note, you're pulsing like a vibrato pulse. So instead of doing a full vibrato where you go like something like this, of course there's many ways to do it, but essentially the way we're using it here is we're going to bring our jaw a little bit lower, allow it to go down a bit, and then back to its original position. So if 0 is your normal embouchure, you're going to bring it down to -1 and then bring it back. So the easiest way to figure that out is to take your lower teeth, which are pushing into your lip. Well, you don't want them to be pushing in, but they're supported under your lip. And you're going to actually let those teeth drop down a little bit, very gently, while you're still playing the note. And the pitch is going to drop. So what you're going to, if you've never done this before, you want to play a note and then gradually drop your lower teeth support until the pitch starts to go down, and relax your throat. So that'll also allow the pitch to go down. Let's try it on a concert B. I'm sorry, an alto saxophone B, which is just your first finger here. And I'm just going to drop the pitch. So you can see how it drops, and you'll find it in different spots for yourself. So feel free to practice that in an exaggerating way. It's okay if it sounds weird or it sounds too much, because you're going to then take that and we're going to sculpt that into something more subtle. So let's do a few. If you have your saxophone, you can do it with me. You can pause this video, get your saxophone, and we're going to blend, allow our jaw and the teeth to drop so the pitch drops. And as you're doing that, imagine you're singing and feel your throat also voicing that pitch. Okay, now what you're going to do is you're going to let that pitch come back up. So you're going to bring your lower teeth back to the normal embouchure. And if you started to feel the voicing in your throat, your vocal cords, bring that back to its normal place. Now you can go farther than this, but to start with, I would recommend a half a step or less of bending. And you can start doing this on all the notes. It sounds a little bit funny, I know, but that's the blend that you're going to use. It's actually used quite a bit in Carnatic music phrases. So that's the first technique, a little bit about it. The second technique is the vibrato pulse. I'm kind of jumping between these two topics because they're highly interrelated. So you'll see at the end why it makes sense. It's basically the same technique applied in different places. So the vibrato pulse technique is a way to actually articulate instead of tonguing, but it gives it a little bit of a push or a punch, that they say in Carnatic music, through the pulse of air that you get from a vibrato. So here's an example. Let's say I'm on the same B note, and instead of doing a vibrato, I'm just going to do a quick pulse of vibrato using the same technique we just did. I'm going to say, you can use the syllable wa, like you're saying wa, water, wa, wa, wa. And that'll stimulate your lower teeth to kind of pulse and come back. Okay, so when you first try it, it might sound like that, a little strong. Then you can slowly relax and get more comfortable with it and make it more subtle. So you can actually replace tonguing in certain spots with this technique. Instead of doing that, you can go. So this is a great way to use articulation, which does not have as much of a strong, sharp hit to it. And it makes it sound a lot more like vocal and vina music and other instruments like violin and flute and nadaswaram, or basically the pure origin, you could say the origin instruments of Carnatic music, and the vocal, that smoothness. So for example, instead of playing something like this, okay, so that sounds a little too punchy. You could play something like this. So you can still have the punch, but it takes out that sharp cut, and that's what the beauty of vibrato pulse is. So now we can see some applications for these. For example, in the intro I played a little bit of Kalyani, and we're going to use it on the ga. And you can actually use it upward so it goes a little bit higher. You can also practice doing it higher. So now the pa can also go down to if you're on your D, the pa can go down by a little bit for the ma. Okay, so sometimes when you want that smoother sound, you can use this vibrato pulse technique. So I'm basically going. Okay, so there's a lot of opportunity now. In my Malava Gaula, for example, sometimes the ma is very close to ga. There's a plain ga with the pulse. I'll show you a couple lines in a krithi where you can use this technique. So for example, Bantureethi kolu, the last line of the Anupallavi. So I did a pulse on the high pa, which implies that ma too. So it brings it down a half step without me having to do. That'll sound very plain and doesn't have the spirit of the song. So it's much more beautiful with the pulse in it. There are many, many other examples aside from this, but I just wanted to give you a taste to get started. So again, to get used to this and start practicing this, I would recommend the exercise we did earlier where you play a note and let the pitch go down and back, and do that through the scale. That's to get used to the pitch going down. Now, same thing I mentioned about other gamakams, the harder your reed is, the more resistance there will be, and the more precise you'll have to be with your air support and your embouchure. The softer the reed is, the more easy and allowing it will be for these nuances, but sometimes it goes too much. Like right now my reed's a little too soft, so it will go sometimes more than we want. So you want to have a few reeds on hand and experiment. The other thing I want to mention is that when you're practicing this, and this is something my guru Gadri sir told me, is to not practice this particular technique by itself for too long, because your embouchure will get kind of confused as to where its home base is. So you have to have a nice clear home base for your embouchure. And then from there, you kind of depart and come back. So if you're bending notes all over the place for like, half an hour, when you go back to play a song, you're going to be a little confused. Your mouth will just not know where its resting place is. So I recommend practicing this for a few minutes at a time, and always be aware of where the home base of your embouchure is. So always relate it back to a pure note. So let's say if you're practicing on ma, that was the Nattai Ragam. If you're on the Re and Nattai, even though you wouldn't perform it that way, but when you're practicing, make sure that you're able to do that so your embouchure stays nice and clean and fresh and not confused. Now for the vibrato pulse technique, which is the very closely related technique, which uses the same muscles and the same approach, you want to do the same thing we were doing, but not have the pitch bend. You want to keep the pitch consistent and make it as subtle as possible. And then you want to replace tonguing wherever possible. So you want to treat it like as though it's tonguing. So you would practice like this. Pick a raga, for example, Maya Malava Gaula. You just go through it. So as you get more and more used to it, you'll have a very nice clean control over it. And then when you're performing raga, alapana, swara, even in krithis, it's used a lot in krithis. So for example, let's say I'm playing. So I used mostly vibrato pulse there. So versus, so it'll become a little too punchy with the tonguing. Of course, there's a way to make the tonguing lighter, so it's not, I exaggerated a little bit there, but you get the idea. So again, these are two useful techniques to having your music and your style have the Carnatic sound. This is a very key technique that will really, if you're trying to bring some of that Carnatic style to your playing, even if you're not playing Carnatic music, but maybe you're playing another style, but you want some of that flavor and the sound and the approach in your playing, this is something you can add to your repertoire of nuances that will really open up some new possibilities for you. So this is kind of the opening layer of how you can use these techniques. There's more to it, but this alone, if you practice, will open up a lot of possibilities for you. So thank you so much for listening and watching. Practice this and let me know how it goes.